identify these burials. They fill out birth, death, marriage, who else has rights to these burial plots, especially when you go to cemeteries and they tell you that their records are burned and they have no access to them. This is something they're doing at the military cemeteries everywhere, and there's hundreds of different religions, but you can find out whether someone is a Buddhist or Hammer of Thor. You know, there is no limit to the religious group that they have there, and all these designs that you can see all over in the veterans' burials now. Okay, these markers are very important because it clues you into additional documentation you can get from military groups and from local Knights of Columbus groups and what wars they fought in. And I still am trying to get the military record for my grandfather because his records were burned in the fire in St. Louis at the National Archives. They are using other kind of record sets to fill in, but I can't give them any information except I've seen a picture of him in a military uniform. But if there was something like this on his grave marker, we would know. But since we moved him from California, we were having a discussion before, he's actually on Find a Grave in 2 places because even though I keep telling them that we have moved him from there, they have resold that plot. And he is here in New York. That person will not change, delete that memorial. So just remember, just because you see it in stone or on a website or on a document doesn't mean it's correct. And in genealogy, we have genealogical standards, which were revised this year. And that's some of the things that we talk about is you have to correlate all of your information. The death certificate with the burial, what's on the stone. Because other than restrictions of the owner of the cemetery, you wouldn't believe what's on there. And if you've ever been to the pet cemetery in Wantagh, oh my goodness, what people call their pets, and they put on their markers is unbelievable. These are new military icons that you can have on private stones if you do not want that plain, simple military burial, and they indicate what branch of the military that they're on. And anybody can apply for this if they are a descendant of someone who was in the military and they already have a marker. Okay? If you don't go to the cemetery, you may not know about somebody's hobbies. This gentleman here was a race car driver, and they put on a stone that he was returned to sender. You see a lot of jokes on stones. Even on military veteran stones, I've started to see on the back, they've given you an area where you can write things about the person. My dad was a race car driver and used to drive with this gentleman. Okay, you get sources of maiden names. Now, if you're doing transcriptions and uploading to Find a Grave, when I take this picture, I don't know who is who. So I actually had to do a little bit more research on Ancestry and found out that in the marriage index, who belonged to who, which of the surnames there. So when you are purchasing a grave marker, think of these things. You know, are your descendants going to be able to figure these things out? Because as I'm a volunteer at the Plainview Family History Center, and I can't tell you how many people do not know their grandparents' last names. Sometimes they don't even know their first names because they call them grandma, grandpa, papa. Okay, you need to visit your cemeteries before they are gone. They are prime when they are looking for expansion, especially when they are vandalized and unkept. Many of them go before town boards, and who knows enough to go there and tell them that you care about this place. We also have to deal with Mother Nature. Hurricane Sandy was the biggest deterrent to cemeteries on Long Island. Long Island National Cemetery had to redo the entire cemetery after Hurricane Sandy because of sinking. It's in the middle of the island. You wouldn't think that they had water damage. They had to dig up everything and put all new platforms under all the grave markers. Okay? This picture on the left is when they started moving cemeteries for the New York drinking reservoirs. They designated towns that would be eliminated because the water for New York City was a priority over less populated towns. There are like 10 different reservoirs. They removed bodies, some of them. Most of the homes, you have the option of moving your home. The rest of the homes are there at the bottom of the reservoir. All the way on the right, San Francisco, especially during the epidemic, they decided to move the graveyards. They disinterred systematically, identified them all, and moved them. That is not what New York City did when they moved all of the cemeteries. This is a map, 1852 map of the cemeteries. Look at all these cemeteries that are supposed to be in New York City. You cannot bury anyone in New York City anymore except for the few churchyards that are left or very specialized. Okay?
What's the cross street? I can't read it from here.
This is
Downtown?
2nd Avenue. And,
First, second.
yeah.
Oh, I see it there,
Okay.
yeah.
But the top one, if you can't read it, is Marble Cemetery. Okay? So in New York City, the same thing. You had a year once they decided that this area is going to be redeveloped to move your ancestors. And if you did not move them, they just plowed over them. So now, every time they try to do expansion in New York, they are digging up the remains of cemeteries and have to
Yeah,
relocate
it's
them.
about 15 years ago, somebody was excavating downtown and they found a graveyard of African Americans.
Yes.
And my girlfriend who lives on Staten Island in Sandy Ground, who's an African American lady, their church and cemetery accepted, I don't know how many of the bodies, but they did have to go out and find appropriate cemeteries to inter them, reinter them, I guess.
They don't usually do that, and all that's left of that cemetery in New York City is a marker
Right.
on the street. Okay, we know that Mother Nature is destroying cemeteries. Look what Katrina did. It not only flooded everything, it unearthed coffins that were floating down the street. And they had to use, what happened after this is they had a GPS tag every one of them to make sure that if it ever happened again, they would know where to put them back. This is from one of the archives, and it talks about how when they were digging up one of the cemeteries, is the construction crew just took everything to the dump. Coffins, skeletons, everything. And what they did in response was just put a marker there. We need to preserve our history. This is from a cemetery out in Setauket, which is, who watches Turn here, where you will find all of Washington's spies buried there. But it tells you where this person was born, in England, where they died. She was his second wife. Okay, here's an article that talked about when the Nagel Cemetery, when they moved it in New York City, and their response, of course, was to do a memorial. And they just lost. They didn't keep a list of who was buried there. They just moved it. Okay, this is back to the Lycum Cemetery in Bethpage. I had taken a photo and somebody complained and said, you know, it's wet, it was raining. When I went back, this is what I found the next time in 2018. It had fallen over on its face. Those are all vines and trees growing on it. You can't even see it anymore. So it's like, I'm sorry, unfortunately, you have to put up with this photo over here on the left. But there is no money, there is no one maintaining it except a shopping plaza who obviously doesn't care very much. This is my sister who is going on a cross-country trek with her husband to visit every state in the U.S. I gave her pages of places to stop and take pictures for me. She got to one cemetery, ended up being, calling, this is before smartphones and things, and she's calling me from Chicago, and she's, she goes, we're standing here waiting for the caretaker. He said he would unearth it. This is in 2005. I called them multiple times, asked them to dig up their other ones that are just sunken there under the ground. 2015, there's a hole filled with leaves and nothing else. I'm going there in 2 weeks. Those grave markers are gonna be dug up. They've paid perpetual care, that is part of your perpetual care. But, I mean, do you see how deep that hole is, that it has sunken down? They didn't do any more after that. This is all the information, and this is in your handout, that you want to find out before you go. We have apps, we have technology. There's not always Wi-Fi in the cemeteries. Greenwood Cemetery will give you this beautiful map. When you get there to the gate, it will not help you find a grave. It will help you drive around the many streets of Greenlawn without getting lost. And I've talked to the security guards there. It takes them a long time to do a sweep of the cemetery to get people who can't find the exit out at the end of the day.
Is that the cemetery in Weston?
This is Greenwood in Brooklyn. Okay, you want to call somebody and find out who is there. You want to know who else is buried there, especially if there's not a marker. And I have been in many cemeteries. First of all, genealogy is not their main business. The cemetery in Bayshore, the woman knows my voice. Says, I'm sorry, I can't give you any information. We're only allowed to give it out to family. Because they want to charge people who would like a photograph $50. And they won't allow you to take pictures in there. And they won't give you this information on the phone. Calvary Cemetery, you know, they're trying to be going concerns. They will charge you $250 for a plot list. And if you go in person, they'll tell you at least 6 people in the plot. But if they're busy or that you can't get that information, it is impossible to find these graves. In Calvary, there are 3 million graves. They do not have an alphabetical list. You don't want to just show up there without doing your homework. You need to know the date of death, and they would prefer the date of burial because all of their records are by date of burial. But they will look up, but they have to look in 3 different sources to just find the plot. And then if you ask who else is in there, they have no information on the stone. And there are other cemeteries, like Greenwood, who have amazing archives and even have photos. Photos, they pretty much have diagrams of the approved stones in the cemetery. You want to know who is buried there. A lot of times people bury their neighbors or friends that they know. And it'll drive you crazy to try to figure out who these people are. You want to know if there's a grave marker, if they have photos. You want to know who the beneficiary is listed on the plot. I'm going to get into something in the next couple slides where that is extremely important. You also want to know what the cemetery policy is about cleaning their stones. You want to know the hours. A lot of cemeteries close at 4:30. And if you get locked in Calvary, too bad. You cannot get your car until the next day. You want to know when the plot was purchased and who is buried in it. And hopefully you want a map. And some people are very helpful. Randy just went on a trip upstate. There is no cemetery office anymore. But she was able to get the information by calling the funeral home who emailed her pictures of how to find the plot. I've had them tape, when I go on road trips, I've had them, tape an envelope on the gate for me with a map so I can figure out how to get it. Because most of the people working in these cemetery offices do not know how to use email or a scanner. You want contact information on the beneficiary.